Right. We are missing our distinguished friend, Mr. Thompson from...
Oh.
We need a microphone, please.
Oh, sorry, Sasha, can you hear me?
Wait.
Welcome to this nice, intimate little gathering to discuss the revitalization of the Great Silk Road. I think the only ground rule for this discussion, and if there's anybody in the audience at some point, we will take your thoughts as we go through this. No speeches, but if you've got a thought or a question for our guests, that's certainly welcome. The only thing I do not want today, I don't want long-winded speeches from panelists telling us how good it is, the Silk Road, how important it is, how significant it is. We know that. We've known that for the last however many 100 years. So we don't need to rehearse again the significance. What we need to look at is the revitalization of it, the North, Middle, South corridor, the geopolitical players within it, who stands to gain, what are the strengths and weaknesses within it, and obviously, Deputy Minister, the significance to your own country in terms of it. So I think in this scenario, I'm going to ask Christopher to begin with I don't really want a speech. And by the way, any of you after somebody's spoken, if you want to just add on, just hit your button and join in. I would say catch my eye, but at this distance, you'll probably be catching a train. Christopher, the Silk Road is as old as time, in a sense, certainly as old as we've been doing trade. It got a new lease on life with the BRI, but it's not just BRI.
No, it's not. You're right. It's the modern phase started with BRI around 2013. Obviously, the Chinese, as we now know, the reason the Chinese built it was partly to create new transport routes, but also a lot of it was to do with transport security, because I remember being in Beijing at the time and some officials talking about the inevitability, for example, of a trade war with the US, of possibility of blockade at ports, and they wanted to have more secure routes across land into Europe.
What was happening on not BRI, but what was happening on the Great Silk Road pre-BRI? No. Was it just an amalgam of different trade routes but no cohesion?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. BRI, obviously before that we had the Trans-Siberian, which was the main route from China into Europe, and then BRI came and I got people thinking and talking about better trade routes and how useful they would be. And of course, in the last couple of years, there's been another catalyst, which is the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the sanctions against Russia transit, which creates the need for more transport routes across Asia. Obviously, particularly the middle corridor, the Trachea route, but it's popularly known as the middle corridor, which, when built, will link Europe across the Black Sea, across the Caucasus, the Caspian into Kazakhstan, then to China. And now we're coming kind of further south with the more southerly routes. Obviously, some regional lines have been built connecting, for example, Uzbekistan into BRI and better connections going north. But we are now talking about the next phase, which could be the China-Kazakh-Uzbek railway, which is expensive and difficult, but at least it's been talked about. And then the big prize, particularly for Uzbekistan, is to get a railway line across Afghanistan into both Pakistan and into the Persian Gulf ports.
If you get that, what does that class as? Middle road, lower, upper middle road, part of it?
Yeah, I guess that we're talking that about maybe the southern route, because we have the northern route, which is BRI or Trans-Siberia, with the middle route now being built and funded by the EBRD. So the southern route is Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Turkey, Iran. That's it. There are
Which
three
is
segments.
different to the oceanic route.
Yes, completely different.
Which is right at the bottom and it's probably the longest in a sense.
Yes, it is the longest.
Right. Deputy Minister, which are you most interested in?
Definitely what the significance of the trade between different corridors. But one thing we should not forget is that 93% of all trade is done by maritime transport. So while we are opening new corridors, building new railways, it is the time and efficiency, not necessarily the price we're looking for, because recent developments around the globe challenges us for the sustainable transport, for the green transport, and something that delivers on time. And this is the utmost important factor for Uzbekistan to open its capabilities, to open that Silkway road in its new form that will help boost not only our economies, but also the whole Central Asia.
The one sort of jeopardy trivial pursuit question that everybody says when you land here is there's only 2 double landlocked countries in the world.
Exactly.
Uzbekistan is one of them. Which is the other one?
That's in Europe.
Anybody know?
Liechtenstein.
Well done.
Yes,
we've done that. So you rightly point out that maritime is the principal form of major shipping globally, but is it your goal to get to a maritime port or to deliver direct? Or both?
Yeah, it's both. I mean, for Uzbekistan, the railway transport is our maritime transport because it's the main transport mode that carries most of our freight, and it's the mode of transport that connects us to the maritime. And as you know, our ambitious and large project, not only from China through Kyrgyzstan to Uzbekistan, but also through Afghanistan into Pakistan. So that gives us opportunity to immediately and fastly reach Indian Ocean. So the South Asia, the CIS countries, as well as Europe is very keen for this project, despite its difficulties and some challenges that we face, but we never choose our, as we say, neighbors. But this is something we are definite, and we're going to make it happen. And this will be the quickest and fastest and most near seaport.
Right, so remind me of all the different routes, which is the one that you are most interested in? Accepting that you like all of them.
I mean, we're simultaneously working on the Kyrgyzstan as well as to Afghanistan. So both projects are on a parallel mode that we're working on. They have the same, I would say, the level of importance.
Sasha, the infrastructure necessary to create and maintain these, how difficult is it?
Not difficult. You know, trains have been existing for probably more than 2 centuries now. So the technology is well known. So in terms of reliability on time of the technology, this is certainly something that is at sight and not a technology challenge at all. Without even mentioning that trains are green mobility today. So in a world of climate change, this also helps reducing the carbon footprint and giving an alternative to maritime roads which could be choked, you know, in ports or in straits. So at the end of the day, you know, it's a railway that needs to be installed, and then to have what we call, you know, steel camels. We used to use camels along the Silk Road 2,000 years ago. Now you need the equivalent, much more powerful, so very large locomotives to be able to pull, you know, wagons of containers and materials. So this is not difficult. This is actually happening. I mean, Mr. Walker talked about Kazakhstan and this middle corridor. Kazakhstan has invested 15 years ago in upgrading their network, electrifying their network, to link the border of China to the Caspian Sea, and has invested into renewing their fleet of locomotives to be able to reach reliable on-time transit.
How much of all of this is in place?
So in Kazakhstan, a lot has been done. There is still a big portion of the fleet that needs to be renewed. In fact, Kazakhstan has asked a technology provider like Alstom not only to deliver the technology, but to localize and transfer the know-how. As you can imagine, transferring know-how, building local manufacturing capacity, repair capability, training the workforce so that, you know, the country doesn't have to send the locomotives back somewhere else if it needs to be repaired. It's a strategic asset for the country, so they want to be able to control everything by themselves. It takes time. So 15 years ago, we started to deliver the first locomotives to Kazakhstan, and at the same time, build up manufacturing factory.
And this is for the line, this is for the route from Kazakhstan?
That's right. It's this factory is in Astana, and this is for the Kazakhstan route, middle corridor, between the border of China and Caspian Sea. Yes.
Deputy Minister, when you look at these routes, there is obviously the same route benefits many parties. You know, if you're building a major trade route, a physical route, it will benefit all the people upon it. So how do you go about setting the priority of which is which?
It is a market that dominates it. It is the obvious infrastructure that comes along with any new corridor or infrastructure that is built. And first of all, it's the country's interest. For instance, we have a little bit of railway section where we are making a new railway line to China. So the main benefiter here is Kyrgyzstan, for instance. But at the same time, if there is no such rail built and operated by Kyrgyzstan, there is no corridor available. So we are deliberating, we are negotiating, we even on a weekly basis. So we share those risks, not necessarily putting on one country alone. So from the other side, it comes China, from this side, Uzbekistan. But moreover, we're also accepting proposals from potential other private and government entities who would be interested, say, to take part in the consortium that would be managing these operations in future.
How far away is the European, you're from the Parliament, this is when it all gets tricky, isn't it? Because everybody wants trade, but there is a political aspect to this.
Of course it is. For me, on my personal point of view, the great challenge of the moment is to achieve a kind of unity across the Eurasian continent. And we are facing a trap. One trap is the Westernization of the world. That was the first step of globalization. At the moment, globalization is mainly Westernization of the world. And the trap is to accept across the Silk Road some kind of Sinization of the world. To escape this trap,
hang on. You're happy to accept the Westernization, but not the Sinization.
I'm not happy to accept the Westernization. I want to have different cultures, different traditions, and I want a multipolar world, or maybe a no-polar world. That means that Westernization is coming to an end. We are living a second phase of decolonization. Decolonization of identities, decolonization of cultures. The best example is in India. India is coming to be named Bharat. India is coming to speak Hindu. no more English, and so on and so on. We have to achieve the same thing. And the Silk Road is a very important asset on this way. We have to achieve the unity of the Eurasian continent. But the trap is between Westernization and Sinization.
Right, but if you have that trap and you are a realist, then wouldn't you rather have it Westernization than Sinization? Because you're on that side. I mean, you're talking about what you would prefer to have neither. But if you've got to have one or the other, which would you prefer?
Problem is at the moment that after this Ukraine-Russia war, European Union is a great loser. European Union is a great loser because what we are saying, President Macron, about strategic autonomy, it was just a dream. Nowadays, it's absolutely nothing. There is no more strategic autonomy for the European Union. We are entirely at the hands of the United States, our biggest allies, but also our biggest contestant. So, with the Silk Road, I spend a lot of time from Eastern China to Western China. I spend a lot of time in Pakistan. I spend a lot of time following the Silk Road. There are many things from the past, and sorry for 1 minute. From the past, all merchants, Jewish merchants for the 9th century, they told to their young fellows, you just have to respect local cultures. Never mix, never interfere into local politics. You have just to remind the old Aristotle, never the Greeks will have a say in Iran politics. Who am I to have a say to Uzbekistan politics, to India politics, or to Russia politics, as well as United States politics? This is the way to keep sustainable the Silk Road. And this is the way we have to respect local cultures and civilizations. We have to be very cautious with foreign direct investment, because sometimes this is the sake of investors against local laws and national interests. This is why we have to build globalizations of a new way.
Christopher, would you like to move here? Since I think our guest is not joining us, or if he is, he can take the far end. But I think I'd much prefer if you, would you mind?
Sitting outside the door.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. That's better. What Javier was just saying, it makes a lot of sense. It's just not realistic. Sorry, I'll let you come back on that. It makes, you don't want the Westernization. Oh, you don't want the Westernization, you don't want the Sinization, if I can say that word. But it's a reality.
Yes. Look, it's not. This is not something that is a consequence of the Silk Road, of the transport routes we're talking about. We are talking about a trade route, trains starting in A, arriving in B, carrying goods. To extrapolate that to something that has got sort of cultural or civilization implications is, to my mind, is a stretch too far. I mean, for example,
wait a minute.
People can fly, and they have been flying. So
right,
it's not going to change.
But those trains from Sasha have to be bought. The money has to be found.
Okay.
It has to be lent and borrowed, and the infrastructure has to be put in place.
This is different, yeah, and we've had this, and of course this is a huge issue with regard to BRI, because countries like Kyrgyzstan are so heavily indebted to China that, the argument is that their political independence is compromised because of that, and we see the same with Sri Lanka, Malaysia, and other countries. So yes, nobody wants to build infrastructure that suits another country and having to assume the cost of building it and getting little out of it.
All those issues relating to BRI, basically ensnaring in debt, were well known when it all happened. It was warned about.
It was warned about, but frankly, you could warn people that don't touch it, it's too hot, but until they burn their fingers, that's just life. So now that is an issue because of what happened with BRI, and countries are very reluctant to take on additional debt to build infrastructure, unless the case for their domestic economic case is very clear, and you have to make that very clear. It actually is in Uzbekistan more than other countries.
I strongly disagree. I'm sorry. I strongly disagree. When you are trains and trucks moving from one country to another, you have also laws from one country to another. You have also investment interest, so you have economic interest. And sometimes you have private arbitration courts who, generally speaking, are defending and promoting interest of private investors against the national interest. So as well as you have trains and trucks moving around, also you have laws and politics moving around. That is the trap I just told about.
Right, but Deputy Minister, this is the trap that you're about to fall into.
You can say there is a trap, but there's always a way to come out of it. You mentioned about the debt. Of course, these large infrastructure projects attracts loans and great resources, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be somehow locked into the debt. But when you build a train, when you build such a great infrastructure, first of all, we are thinking about economy. First of all, we are thinking about new ways to trade and the other benefits that overcome and overall brings a total benefit that always greater than what the individual organizations come into the debt process. But on the other hand, about respecting the laws, respecting the culture, it's a must. Because without understanding of each other from the political side, from the cultural side, there cannot be any sort of relationship in any aspect. So same thing, transport opens doors. We build hardcore road from one point to another. But in order to build that, we have to communicate. We have to understand each other, and we have to come up to the joint, mutually favorable decision, and that favors all of the participants. So I think both aspects are equally important.
Sasha, you sell trains.
What we see today in countries is an attempt to move away from this dependency. I mean, sovereignty is important, and when you can't be sovereign, like having your own assets, then you try to, or at least countries are trying to, multiply the number of connections they can have with several countries, so that they are not fully in the hands of one. Put your eggs in different baskets. And
is that realistic?
Yes.
Is that realistic? Everybody would like to try and do that.
Well, it is. If I see the example of Kazakhstan, the locomotives were financed by France. The infrastructure upgrade was financed by China. And at the end of the day, both China and EU are benefiting from that new link. So, and by the way, like a Deputy Minister was saying, some neighboring countries are benefiting too. As Kazakhstan saw that they can upgrade their route, but if Azerbaijan doesn't upgrade its route, it's going to choke the connection. So they started to actually support Azerbaijan to upgrade their system. And locomotives from Kazakhstan are now being built in Kazakhstan for Azerbaijan. So that's what we see. Countries are becoming much more agile, speaking to many stakeholders.
We're going to do a very unusual thing here. Highly unusual. You and I are going to swap seats again.
Jeez.
And there's a reason for this.
Okay, I hope so.
The reason is because I shouldn't have been in that seat in the first place. I should have been in a seat where I can see all of you in one go. That's better. You wanted to join in on this idea.
Look, what I wanted to say was, we talk a lot about the new networks, connecting Europe and China, but actually, I think it's already been referred to, the biggest winners in this build-out of the various networks are the countries in Central Asia and the Caucasus. Because, okay, if you're in, say, China or Europe, you have a choice. You've got a seaport. You can put a container on the ship. It takes twice as long to get from A to B, but at a quarter the price. But if you're in Uzbekistan or even Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, etc., you don't have a seaport. So the build-out of the transport networks, which not only creates much greater connectivity within the region, between the Caucasus and Central Asia, but also then opens up much greater possibilities for countries that are otherwise landlocked to get more quickly to a seaport. That has an enormously positive impact on trade possibilities for countries in Central Asia and Caucasus, if to a much greater extent than Europe and the US, or China, sorry.
Right, but in a perfect world, that's exactly how it goes. The Central Asian countries benefit regardless. But Deputy Minister, it's not a perfect world. And the reality is, in this multi-bipolar, whatever you want to call it, world, at some point it's going to get nasty. And we'll talk about separately about Russia, Ukraine in a moment with you, Hervé. But at some point decisions have to be made. At some point pressures will be brought to bear, Minister.
Pressure is always there, regardless of what's happening, and the changes around the world and unexpected changes, they will be happening, from my perspective, more and more. And if we just analyze last 5-10 years, we have seen so many disaster situations where the supply chain was totally broke down. And we have understood that unless and until we open more transport corridors, more opportunities, unless we develop our ties with all possible trade partners, it will be difficult. And when we are only putting your eggs into one basket and then hope that that basket will feed you for the rest of your life, or then it will be difficult to survive in the future. That's why Uzbekistan's policy is transparent, it's open, and it's specifically for the transport corridor. We want to develop and open as much corridors and routes possible so that our trade, our future doesn't suffer. And we will be building our sustainability through that infrastructure.
How much of this strategy is a sophisticated version of we hope we never have to make a choice?
Your questions are getting difficult and difficult.
Well, while you're thinking of how you want to deflect it back to me, I'll ask you, Hervé, how much of the strategy for this region, of which Europe is playing as much a both encouraging, constructive, and mendacious part of it as the US, China, and Russia and everybody else, how much is it we want to keep these countries in our friendly orbit? The US ambassador to me yesterday, I was interviewing him, we're broadcasting it tonight on CNN, the US ambassador says, we don't mind, we just want the Uzbeks to have a choice. Well, there's a certain sophistry in the argument, but you hope they have a choice and they choose wisely.
It's so good to keep open doors, and it's so good to have many choices. This is the Indian foreign policy of multi-alignment, and I agree entirely with this policy. You have to keep doors open, and you have to keep your national interest first. So this is a way for Central Asian countries all along the Silk Road. We have to manage a balanced policy between economic growth and social progress, balanced policy between foreign investment and national interest and national sovereignty. And what is more important, between globalization and democracy. Because at the end of the day, if along the Silk Road there is uniformization, compliance, and uniformization, at the end of the day, globalization means global war. Because the true nature of humanity is political freedom. And if political freedom is constrained by economic influence and foreign investment, at the end of the day, you will have a surge of political freedom. That is a very important issue. For me, diversity of political regimes, diversity of cultures and civilizations is not a liability, it's the true asset of the world.
How
And
do you-
we have to
how do you
preserve it
prevent-
against globalization.
How do you prevent that? Which I'm sure, you know, it's a bit like motherhood and apple pie. In the US, everybody says how excellent. But when you have that political diversity, I say political diversity, not cultural diversity. When you have that political diversity, do you not build in risk to that trade route?
Of course you have risk, but you have for me a major risk if you try to align everybody along the Silk Road. I'm very against the former Westernization of the world, but I fear also a Sinization of the world.
Right. I'm hoping that you're William Thompson.
Indeed. My apologies. I was at the Foreign Investors Council, which ran very late, and no one had made arrangements to get those of us back quickly back, so I
Right. Well, just move your microphone
apologize.
to sort of down.
I apologize, yeah.
That's it. No problem. We're just discussing the nature of the different routes and putting it into that sort of political aspect to it. Now, from the as head of the Eurasia division of the OECD, you've looked at this quite closely, I assume, and the workability under the revitalization of the Silk Road is what, would you say?
Well, to start with the big picture and narrow in, I mean, first of all, I mean, there's tremendous potential along what is sometimes referred to as the Middle Corridor, the Trans-Caspian International Corridor, various ways of strengthening the connectivity of Central Asian states for overland trade routes. I would just make, perhaps by way of opening, 3-4 very quick points. First, what our work suggests, and we've been working on this since 2017 together with the International Transport Forum and others, is that it's only going to make sense to the extent that these routes develop as engines of trade integration across the region, not merely transit routes for shipping things very rapidly between China and Europe. So any attempt to develop these routes in a serious way has to go hand in hand, not only with the development of new infrastructures and new dry ports and that sort of thing, it has to go with measures in the way of soft infrastructure to reduce trade barriers, enhance trade facilitation, frankly, to improve investment climates across the region so that business is being done.
Isn't there an element of chicken and egg in that? Insofar as if you build the routes, then those benefits that you seek, besides just shifting the goods from China to Europe, will come naturally.
They won't come naturally. They will come, but they won't come naturally. They require investment, they require foresight, they require effort. We see this across the region, where one of the problems we observed before the pandemic, and I think things are better now, before the pandemic, one of the issues we discussed with several countries in the region was the focus on the big kind of very long-term routes was coinciding with a kind of neglect in many places of national and regional infrastructures that would connect to those routes, so that you really were building for transit rather than for trade. And of course...
Give me an example of what you mean in this.
Well,
because the rail line that has to go from, or the sea line or whatever, that has to go from China to Europe does go through these countries.
It absolutely does. The question is, how well do the railways and road networks in those countries function in order to deliver goods from within those countries elsewhere to the region or onto those main lines that go through? In other words, it's as though you were building extremely fast superhighways without building local and regional road networks of sufficient quality to do this. The
A bit like Britain trying to build the Northern Line and not putting anything else on it. Is that what you mean?
Something like that.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, it is a chicken and egg, isn't it? I think, because a holistic view is necessary, at least from a technology provider like we are. It's not just about having the right, trains or the right route or the right signaling system or control system. It's a whole holistic. Let's say, project and system that needs to be put in place to secure mass transit, because ultimately after that you want to use this facility and this asset on a regular basis at high mass every single day of the year, and you rely on arrival on time of every container. Yeah. So it's a challenge, technical challenge.
Just to reinforce that, it's not just holistic in the sense of a broad view. It has to go very deep. We did a survey of private.
Can you bring your microphone a bit
We did a
closer?
survey of private transport and logistics companies working across the region last year. And one of the things that came up in lots of the responses had to do with really fairly small technical, not the lack of big investments, but fairly small technical bottlenecks that meant that, for example, the Caspian ports never run at anything like capacity, and yet there's tremendous congestion around them. So it's a bit of a paradox. I mean, if you're running way below capacity, why are the queues? And the answers are in the port systems, really quite specific equipment that was missing made those modal shifts much slower than they needed to be. So it's an extremely complex game, and it requires quite a deep look at what is needed to make it run smoothly and seamlessly.
About the soft infrastructure and hard infrastructure. Soft infrastructure comes next. Without hard one, we cannot build on the soft one. But simultaneously, of course, when we do the feasibility study, we do the field study, we analyze our trade possibilities, potential. Of course, all these elements and calculations are taken into the consideration. But the recent development from our side, from Uzbekistan perspectives, until we build conditions and create infrastructure, there is no demand. So it's not necessarily working otherwise. There is a big demand, then we go after it and build something. No, we have to create infrastructure, create environment that suits, and there will be a choice for trader to choose where to go from and what connection to take from. So that's
But William's right, isn't he, when he says that what you don't want is to be Highway 1. You don't want Highway 1 to go right the way through the middle and you can't get to it.
Exactly. And of course, the harmonization of border procedures, the laws, the customs issues, these are the biggest bottlenecks that usually interferes for the smooth operations of the freight. So that also comes along when we go into the integration. We talk about standardization, we talk about the digitalization, we talk about sharing information in advance, and then so that we make everything possible so that any cargo goes smooth. The other point I'd like to make is, when we're building railway or developing a particular route, we are much more looking at the containerization. So containerization has been on the sea freight for many, many years. Now it easily can go from one mode of transport to another, so the freight goes intact. So another, I would say, the important aspect for Uzbekistan is to look into the container yards, container depots, and to look into the standardization for the carriage of cargo.
But containerization in terms of these routes, I mean, containerization in terms of standardization has been around for a long time in terms of aviation and in terms of maritime. So it surely is not that difficult to, you're looking at me like it is that difficult.
Well, I think that probably the expert is over there, but no, it's not that easy.
Is it difficult to get
different gauges?
No.
You have to keep changing trains because the widths are different.
No, yeah. I mean, the only difficulty indeed is that the gauge, so the distance between the rails, the width of the rails is different sometimes, country to country, but that's, it's just a matter of the rolling stock to adjust.
But
technologically speaking, it's not difficult. Containers are standards. Yeah.
I was on a train in Switzerland that went through Italy and a variety of other places, which miraculously, I mean, it must have been a very expensive train, the Golden something or other, which did all of that, including going up and down for the different platforms. The technology exists for trains to do it.
Not only it exists, but the digitalization is entering the age of these mechanical machines at the speed of light. So now we have, especially in the logistic area, we are delivering technology now that is able to load materials automatically onto the trains, to transport automatically the trains to the port, to unload automatically the materials onto the boat, not, you know, without having one person managing it.
Yeah, actually, just a slight change in that there is a question mark over the viability of the middle corridor compared to the southern routes, which is why there's now, I think, more interest on the southern routes, which favors Uzbekistan, going through Turkmenistan, Turkey, or to the Gulf. And that is because the Caspian is shrinking. The north of the Caspian is shrinking. And if, like, let's say, a study done recently by Dresden University, if nothing is done, and of course that's enormous if nothing is done, then the ports that are currently being used for the transportation across the Caspian will be on dry land by the end of the decade, or sorry, the end of the century. So it's 50 years. And of course, that's a big if, because you would assume...
We won't be here then.
Sorry? We won't be here, no, to say I was wrong. But, you know, so solutions probably will be found. But it is global warming, it's an inland lake, it's evaporating, there's, you know, it's already very visible. But it does favor the routes that we're talking, where we are, building the China, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan route, and then eventually the trans-Afghanistan route to Iran. That's what makes more sense.
Yes and no. Caspian Sea, we have seen the shrinkage for the last 5 years, significant shrinkage, especially on the northern eastern side of the Caspian. And as an example of Kazakhstan, they have done significant, you know, investment on the ports, because they have to keep them deep so that ships can still come and do their job. But there is an analysis also available that Caspian Sea has a tendency to fulfill each other itself after certain years. So that circle usually goes for 9 years. It goes shrinking and then goes above. If we just look at the Baku port or other ports which are available, but the water, the shoreline is still there, and it's not only the people, but the ports authority, they observe that tendency. So I hope that it doesn't shrink beyond where we cannot use the ports.
I think it's a good moment. Has anybody got in the room who's an expert on this or would like to join and make any points upon this? Then just put your hand up, and I'll invite you to maybe to take the seat at the end and say anything, but you're welcome just to continue to listen. Oh, yes, sir, have a seat at the end. Well, unless you're very loud. Just have a seat at the end and push the button. No speeches, though. Who are you?
Hey, my name is Umar Bek. I'm from Hudson Sunlight Company. Yeah, my argumentation, I've mostly not question, but statement about the beginning part of the round table regarding the, sorry if I spell it wrong, Juvin, right? Your arguments about the threats and risks that we might have during the trade relationships. So basically Central Asia is the region that needs threats and risks. And here's the story of myself.
Oh, please, not a long speech, please.
No, it's not a long speech, yeah. Actually, Central Asia does not want to be just like a spoiled child entering to the adult life. Central Asia needs threats and risks to learn on its own mistakes. That's the way how countries become successful.
Right.
And that's why we need threats, we need risks, and Central Asian countries are not alone.
Yeah, well, whether you need them or not, you're going to get them. Yeah. They're there. Thank you. Do you agree with this?
I wouldn't say threat, maybe challenges. Challenges.
Challenges, yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, but the problem with your challenges, every time they come along, you all want to run in the opposite direction.
Yeah, look, the other point I guess I want to make, and again, reinforcing what we all agreed on, is that what we're seeing now with building of all these networks greatly helps the Central Asian Caucasus nations more than anybody else. And therefore, the question is, you know, is it worth it? You know, in terms of the funding from Europe and from China. So if you're in China or Europe, you have a choice of a ship. You can send a container from Hamburg to the coast of China. It's 40 days and it's $6,000. You can do it in 14 days for $24,000 by train. Okay. I think one of the reasons why there's such an interest on the network in Central Asia now is partly because of the Russian sanctions and partly because of the Red Sea. But if both of those issues go away, you know, how much volume are you going to get on the railways? Look, just-in-time fashions, stuff like that, I get it. But the bulk of what's traded in the world between the two biggest economies of China and Asia, it doesn't make sense to go on a $24,000 container train when you literally 2 weeks later you get it for a quarter the price.
So what are you arguing for with
I'm
that?
arguing basically is that the connectivity we're seeing in the region greatly enhances the economic prospects and global trade prospects and regional trade prospects of the countries in Central Asia. It doesn't do much for anybody else, but they're paying for it.
Right, well that's good, isn't it?
Yeah, of course it is. But if you were sitting in Europe making the case, you think, it doesn't make sense. But it does if you're in Central Asia and Caucasus.
Right, but one will flow to the other. I mean, are they not two sides of the same coin? Yeah, your $24,000 thing from one side to the other. But you get that benefit, and you get the benefit of the Central Asia trade.
Oh yeah, no, but it is absolutely the intra-Central Asia Caucasus trade. That is absolutely the main beneficiary of all of this.
Oh, well, I mean, this, broadly, I have to agree with that. I was going to say that the mention of the Red Sea reminds me, of course, that at the beginning of our work on connectivity, well before the pandemic in about 2017, one of my running jokes was that if you really wanted to make this competitive, the Central Asian states should come together and create a fund to subsidize piracy on the high seas. Maritime dominates. Maritime will continue to dominate. What we found, particularly when we surveyed the private sector, is the middle corridor, the southern corridor, these overland routes absolutely have a business case, but it's not going to replace maritime. It needs to be seen realistically as to how much it can develop, how much it will carry, and that is one of the reasons we come back to the trade issue and the fact that it's got to be a generator of trade, not just a transit route. I do want to, if I may, go back to the Caspian. The studies I'm reading are not nearly as reassuring as what our colleague has said. We don't know. Climate change may be a part of it, but it seems to be accelerating. I've seen some very alarming predictions for the end of the century, and it is not necessarily unavoidable, and this is the other thing that's critical. There are 130 rivers that feed the Caspian. One of them, the Volga, provides 80% of the river flow into the Caspian Sea, and a good deal of the reduction in flow into the North Caspian comes about as a result of changes in water use policies in one very large country. A shift in policy or outlook there would have enormous implications for the Caspian, but for understandable reasons, it's a difficult issue for the Caspian littoral states to raise.
No, but I think it's, without wanting to step on the third rail, as the Americans say, I think it's, you make the point that you make the point elegantly with that we cannot discuss, and in many ways, I think this is a very useful and very important discussion here, because you cannot discuss these things without dealing with, for example, as you say, the Caspian, I mean, the geopolitical reality of what can and cannot be done. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, well, we can go home and have a cup of tea after that.
Yeah, and it's something that comes up a lot when we're having discussions with our clients and they're looking at the huge investment projects. And it comes down to, the enormous cost of building infrastructure. And then the question is, well, what happens when the war ends? It will end, because all wars do. And there is an enormous infrastructure across Russia's Siberia. And we already know from what Russia's doing with energy, with gas, with other materials, it will cut the heck out of the cost in order to get the business back. So that's, it's a big elephant in the room, or the big bear in the room,
But if trade grows sufficiently,
that's an if.
If trade grows sufficiently, then does pardon the Caspian, does the rising tide, assuming there's any water left, lift all the boats? And how significant for you, Minister, is the significance of having a diversity of routes? I'm thinking of Europe and its energy supplies in the last 2 or 3 years. The argument of after the war ends, will they go back to buying their oil and gas from Russia? Well, have once, twice shy.
I think you're right. Diversification is the word in everybody's lips, and it's the reason you get when you talk about costs and possible competition from Russia later. Yeah, the diversification argument is absolutely the one to use, and you need it.
100% diversification. Without that, there is not only being able to respond to challenges. Situation in Russia is one case, but look what happened when the COVID-19 came. It was a disaster. Even on the Maritime, all the ports were full. We could not move cargo, which was about to move in 30 days. We didn't receive anything for 6 months.
So how, related to that, how far will international investors, multilaterals, the EU, how far will they invest on the basis of diversification is good for all, rather than immediate profit in a route that works? We'll take you first, sir, since you're sort of European Parliament.
I think it's a mistake to oppose ground routes to maritime routes. What I can see across Pakistan, what I can see across different countries, is that the main interest about trains and trucks is local trade. For instance, you have a boat from Shenzhen to Western Europe. You can have trucks on rails across Central Asia. Some of them, after CPEC achievement, to the deep sea harbor of Gwadar in Pakistan or to Shabar in Iran. You have a lot of local trade. For instance, and it was the same thing across history with the caravans. You can buy goods in this place, you send a part of these goods in another place, you buy goods in Central Asia, you are to sell these goods in China, and you would come back with a lot of different steps of trade. This is diversification.
Right, but
and
that
this
is
what the train routes and truck routes are allowing. It's not the same as for maritime routes, for instance, for Central Asia. You have to be connected with maritime routes, and it's not so easy, and it's a huge logistics problem.
Yeah, we used to, as an organization, but also countries, we used to try to optimize, the route and globalization or your energy supply is the cheapest, so now you're going to do everything this way. We were doing the same with supply chain, But in today's world, the amount of uncertainty and disruption is imposing to diversify. Because we realize that whatever supply chain we came up with, whatever optimum point that we managed to, generate, may be thrown into the air just for a tweet or something that, is happening in the world. So this is what we see today. And, our supply chain is becoming much more solid, and we are now measuring our KPIs is not anymore dollar only of the supply chain, but is robustness of the supply chain. What happens if? And I think countries follow the same path. If you see UAE, UAE have an issue with the Strait of Hormuz, which is a choke point, which if it's blocked, 30% of the oil cannot be shipped anymore. What is UAE doing now? They are building a railway through Oman to connect the Gulf to the Indian Sea and bypass the strait. And suddenly the strait is much less of a weapon, to block.
Yeah, I think before we end the session, to complete the picture, we haven't mentioned the International North-South Transport Corridor, which is the other major route that is being built, I guess, between geopolitical players, Russia and India. But it also, it kind of connects the rectangle. It adds enormously to the connectivity of the states in Central Asia and the Caucasus to the outside world and between each other. So this is one of the reasons why, for example, you can have no problem getting consumer goods in Moscow stores right now, despite sanctions, because the end of that route is Bandar Abbas, which is just across from Dubai, and that's the main route to Russia these days. So, you know, there are four very large kind of intercontinental routes being built, all of which completely open up Central Asia into the Caucasus to an extent that never happened before.
And as those four open up, because, the final thoughts, because of the geopolitical difficulty, can they be optimizedly efficient in a sense? Because they're always going to be at the whim of what, I mean, the north-south, you beautifully say, you've got these four great routes,
yes,
that if you were sitting at a large table like this and could control them all, you would say, that does this does that does the other, and you'd make maximum use, but you can't.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, that is the reality. Look, we talk about bottlenecks right now, and obviously capacity and handling issues, efficiency issues, and as the minister said, these will all get resolved, you know, in time, and you can go far enough down the road.
So what's the one thing that needs to happen?
Sorry?
To each of you as we come to the end. Start with you, Sasha. I'll take Sasha first. What's the one thing that needs to happen?
I think growth of those connection trade routes, financing of those routes, I think is going to help decreasing pressure and stress on those countries, you know, and increase trade.
Thank you. I'll take you next, because I think you're the one who has an aircraft that's not going to wait for geopolitics. The one thing that needs to happen, push a button. Sir, push.
I think it's more of the same. I mean, obviously, we could talk about all the, you know, the tariff issues and resolving the bottlenecks and issues like that, but they will get resolved, and you know, to some extent, they're just normal bureaucracy and administrative reasons. But I think just agreeing on the administrative measures that allows trains to go efficiently from, you know, from Paris to Shanghai across Central Asia and connecting with all the routes, you know, without waiting for days at borders for paperwork to be done. That's, I think, is the next big challenge, is crossing borders without this cumbersome and delaying paperwork.
I'm not going to delay. Sir, feel free to leave. You have my... Please, just go and fly safely. Godspeed.
Thank you. Well, I've moved around a lot already. So
There you go.
thank you
Fly
very
safe.
much.
One thing that needs to be done.
The business environment reforms that are needed to help Central Asian states get rich. None of this investment in physical infrastructure, trade facilitation, all these wonderful things that I work for and support is going to deliver the prosperity this region seeks if that's what is done and we're simply relying on trade flows from outside to generate Central Asia's prosperity. At the end of the day, we still need to come back to the more fundamental reform agenda that we've been discussing
Intra-Central European
in
trade.
Uzbekistan, because if Central Asia, the more dynamic Central Asia itself becomes, the easier it is to see the payoffs to these investments.
Stay with that thought, sir.
There is a huge consensus around this table. Trade is good and international trade is good. But at the end of the day, politics will prevail. And I entirely agree with you. At the end of the day, trade is good if it delivers for the average citizen. It delivers for the daily life of the citizens. That is why trade is very important, but trade cannot prevail against national interest, against the diversity of traditions, religions, and cultures. And at the end of the day, trade can't prevail about a multipolar or maybe a no polar world.
Minister, we're in your country. You kindly brought us all here. You get the last word. The one thing that, because you see, you know, how many members of the parliament are there? 600 or whatever. So you're stuck with all of them. You can't make much change on your own. He can sell trains. You're a minister. You can actually make change.
Policies, synchronization of policies across the Central Asia, across the corridor, digitalization of our customs, border control, and as we said, one example, we have LPI, which is Logistics Performance Index. Uzbekistan has grown 10 points for the last 5 years. So when we look at those 6 factors, number one is still we have those bottlenecks on the borders. So that's something we have to work on.
So
second is the digitalization that we have
How
to...
significant is political will in that list?
It's very strong, very strong. We have AIM for 2030. There is a policy, strategy. It's signed by our president, and we will we'll make all those, our goals happen by 2030, maybe even earlier.
Next year, when we're all back here discussing it, can we have a smaller table, please? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.